to the Light Home Sustainable Design podcast series. We talk with the architects and builders about green design and homes that really suit the way we love to live.
My name is Carlos Martinez. I'm here today talking with Design Ambassador Mišo Vasilović of Mišo and Associates Architecture and Interior Design Firm. And he's talking about the Geilston residence. So tell us, Mišo, why did you choose it for your Design Ambassador?
Well, I chose it for a number of reasons. The main reason I'm going to be following through all three of my projects that I'll be looking at for Lighthouse is to deal with sites that are difficult, being steep and things of that nature, so that we can look at the reasons why a particular project, such as the one I've chosen, is more cost effective for the end user.
Okay, great. And tell us where this project is and what sets it apart.
This project's located in Hobart, Tasmania. It's on the eastern shore of Hobart, for those who know Hobart. So it basically looks across the water of the Derwent River up to the mountain. And if those who know Hobart well, there's different climatic conditions around Hobart. And this is in a much drier area than the existing rest of Hobart.
Okay, great. And so it's obviously built on a very steep site. How did the architects and builders overcome this issue?
For starters, one of the reasons I've chosen this particular project is the fact that it's an owner-builder and designer, so it's not something that's the normal standard. It's basically somebody who's decided that they wanted to do their own design and then follow through the construction, as well as being obviously the owner. So in doing so, they've looked at this site because of its being quite economical. It was a cheap site to buy because of its nature being quite steep. And then in turn, they've looked at the design of what they could build on the site and the materials that they wanted to use. So the materials that they were wanting to use initially when they were looking at were heavyweight materials. But when they started to go into it, they realised that the cost of the heavyweight materials was going to be outside the parameters of their budget. So they had to then look at a lot of version or a lot of construction methodology.
And you also said that earlier in a project brief you mentioned that the design is elegantly simple. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's not an overly complicated design. It's broken up for a couple that have getting close to retirement, so they're looking at the internal layout of the house as being a centralised kitchen area, lounge area, and then broken off into series of areas for them to do their own hobbies and alike. So the design itself is fundamentally on two levels, and the upper level is living, and the lower level is sort of amenities. The overall design is simple from the point of view of being it's a rectangular box. It's not complicated to look at. When you read the volume of the structure, it's quite simple to understand. And that's what I mean when it's simple. It's nothing of it is complicated to understand from a layperson looking at it.
And how is it unique to the Hobart housing landscape?
Well, it's unique from the point of view, a lot of houses in Hobart, a lot of builders, etc., look for the flattest piece of land because then they want to basically do a slab on ground and then do brick veneer or masonry type construction. So a lot of the areas that are in the bush are on steeper slopes. So this is unique from the point of view that it's a lightweight construction on a very steep site that basically then starts to pick up the views and in turn allows it to get good light penetration, sun penetration, because it starts to look at picking up northern sunlight and also gets good cross ventilation. So it's unique from those points of view in Hobart. A lot of the houses are sort of built in gully type areas or on sort of semi-ridges as opposed to being on areas that are sort of traditional.
And what part did lightweight materials play in the construction of this home on, as you've said earlier, a difficult site?
The use of lightweight materials, as I said, was driven by their budget. Originally, they looked at heavyweight materials, and the cost difference was basically double. So the lightweight materials that they eventually chose, they chose for reasons of the cost effectiveness and also material handling on site. So when a truck gets to the site and they have to basically deliver the material, the transfer of the material across the site is economical rather than having to get cranes in or things of that nature. So the material that they used was plantation-grown hardwoods for the stud framing, and then created a series of platforms and then a very simple roof that basically sheds the water and gets light penetration in from the sun.
So Micho, when you say lightweight materials, can you explain or elaborate a little bit more as to what materials you're referring to?
Certainly. The study from the outside and the external cladding was a corrugated iron cladding right throughout, basically across the roof and on the walls. Then the internal framework was of a plantation-grown hardwood that created the stud framing. This was also for both the floor and wall framing. The floors on the first floor, which was main living and lounge areas and bedroom areas, they wanted to have tile floors throughout, so best solution to that was the Sauron Secure Floor system that was basically run throughout the entire living area, and then it was tiled over the top. The soffit of the upper level was done with a Sauron cladding, and this allowed for flexibility for plumbing, etc., that run underneath the floors. And then the internals were all gyprock and then heavily insulated to an R value of 6.
So please tell me, Micho, what makes this home sustainable?
A number of levels, Carlos. The first one I'd like to sort of start on the macro is that Tasmania basically generates all its power from hydro, so that the energy efficiency of the home comes down to basically people using hydroelectricity as opposed to brown or grey or black coal-fired power generated from power stations. Coming down to the house itself, we basically have a corrugated external facade and also the roof. Now, the reason this is sustainable is because metal has less embodied energy to create it, and it's also totally recyclable. Where heavyweight materials, it costs and takes more embodied energy to create the material. Then if we move through into the interiors, we have plantation-grown timbers that are basically the stud and wall framing and floor framing. Then when we move through to the windows, the other areas that are very sustainable is the fact that the windows are double glazed and thermally broken aluminium windows. The thermally broken aluminium windows are a window frame that basically has a plastic insert that stops the heat transferring out and the heat transferring in, and the double glazing allows for a thermal barrier in relation to the heat escaping from the house. The house then is totally insulated to an R value of 6, which gives it a good insulation mass for protecting from, in this case in Tasmania, it's about the cold and keeping the house warm.
How does this home suit the Australian climate, or in particular Tasmania's climate?
I think this home matches up with particularly Tasmania's climate in the fact that we're able to get a very high level of insulation in the walls, and we're able to really create a mass through insulation and through wall materials and through floor materials without actually spending the money in heavy masonry. So it applies directly to particularly Hobart in relation to keeping the warmth in and the cold out. It basically does answer the brief from that point of view.
And you touched on earlier that it's a home that's built quite cost effectively, with the lightweight materials saving about 50% of the construction costs. Are you able to elaborate a little bit more about how this home was built cost effectively?
Yes, I can. The owner, builder and designer, when they first looked at it, went through the whole premise of wanting to build what was a traditional home. And when they looked at the heavyweight materials on the site, it was basically way outside their aspirations of their budget. And in doing so, they had to review everything and had to review the need to basically handle the material on site. And when I say that is physical transport costs of material to a site and then actually offloading that material, particularly onto a steep site, becomes very unwieldy. And you've then got to either pay for craneage or massive amounts of labour to actually move the material, in this case it could be bricks or block, around the site. And if you had concrete slabs, you've then got to get pumps in to basically pump the concrete into place. Where lightweight materials can be much more physically handled by a couple of people moving the material around as opposed to the heavyweight nature of other materials. This in turn basically impacts on someone's cost in their construction and is often forgotten about. Where when someone does a design for a project for a home, they should always actually look not only at the design and what they want and how many bedrooms, but how it's actually going to be built and the buildability of the materials and the buildability of the shell and the structure that's going to create their home.
And do you think it would have, the designer and builder would have achieved a similar or the same effect using heavyweight materials rather than lightweight?
Well, the answer is frankly no, because they wouldn't have been able to build half the house, because they wouldn't have been able to build their dream house or their aspirational house and the volume that they wanted to create to retiring. So the answer is flatly no, they could not have achieved the same volume, the same type of house by using heavyweight materials. They just couldn't afford it. It's one thing to say, can they afford it, or could you build it? You can always build it with lots of money, but it's about being cost effective.
All right. Do you have a wrap up comment to make about why you chose this as your, or what makes this home a good ambassador's choice?
To wrap up, I think this is the first of 3 projects that I've chosen, and as I've mentioned, this house is an owner, builder and designer, and I think it's a very good example, and hopefully all 3 will show the different ranges of design. And this is looking at the very basic, where most people look at developing a house or designing a house and they all go through the process. This one captures somebody's dream and makes it real with a very simple design, with a very steep site. It's a hard site, but it's got all the advantages of views, etc., in the environment. So this is the first of 3, and I think this one basically captures the basic dream of everybody to actually design, build and own their own home.